Hey everyone, I'm Mike Settele, and I guess it is time again for one of these prediction videos, this time for the November 2024 SAT. We're only 2 days away. I put this off as long as I could because I was hoping I wouldn't have to make it, but I got too many requests, and so we're doing it. I will make some predictions, but for the most part, I'm going to focus on the things to do in the last 2 days before the test, what you should study, what you should review, what you shouldn't do, and also we will do a practice hard reading passage that I wrote so that I can make a little bit of a prediction about the kinds of dumb summaries that we're going to want to use on this SAT and future SATs. But the reason I don't like these prediction videos is I think they're a little bit dishonest. I have no prior knowledge of what kinds of questions exactly are going to be on your SAT. No one does, but we do know how to make predictions based on what's been on past SATs. So if you've been studying, you are going to be just as good at making predictions as I am. You know what topics are going to come up. You know what grammar rules you're going to see. You know what kinds of weird, hard stuff there's going to be and what kinds of strategies we can use to deal with that weird, hard stuff. So just be careful in these next 2 days what kinds of YouTube videos you're watching. There's a lot of these prediction videos out there now, and I don't think they're very good. A lot of people are just spoiling practice test questions. So if the November SAT is your first SAT, you might be ruining resources that you're going to need later on because these people are giving you spoilers, giving you answers without warning you first. I've also seen a couple of these videos where they're just making AI, artificial intelligence questions. They've got tons of typos. They're terrible. And so just be careful. A lot of people out there are much more interested in improving their subscriber count than they are in improving your scores. So if you're looking for a reliable resource, I will always be honest with you. I will always label things correctly and make sure that I don't spoil things accidentally for you. So if especially this is your first SAT, give me that subscribe, and I think you'll find that you get a lot of great resources right here on the Settele Tutoring channel. Let's talk about how to use those resources over the next 2 days. Thursday, you definitely want to do some active studying. You want to go over some things that you have to memorize. We'll talk about strategies. I'll make some predictions about that and what you should be studying specifically, but you definitely want to be reviewing a little bit on Thursday. You also want to do the logistical thing of going to the Blue Book app and signing in for your test. You should have gotten an email from the College Board about this. Make sure you do this. Make sure Blue Book is updated and working and all good. You don't want to do that the day of the test. Now, should you take a practice test on Thursday? I don't think so for most people. If you've done practice tests already, then maybe you can go back to old ones and use my videos to review questions that you got wrong or struggled with, but I don't think you need another score this close to the real thing. I'd rather you kind of focus on specific topics that you're struggling with. Though if you haven't studied at all, then yes, Thursday is time to take a practice test. You do not want to be going into the real SAT never having seen one. So if this is the first video you're watching about the SAT, well, good luck. But yeah, you want to take a practice test and get some sort of overview. You don't want to be doing that on Friday though, because Friday you want to rest up for Saturday. So do some passive studying, watch some videos, review some things, but don't be doing like dozens of SAT questions or taking a full practice test or section. Save your brain power. There's a limited amount of energy here. And if you get all tired on Friday, you're going to be tired on Saturday. So passive studying at most, though if you don't want to do any studying, that's also okay with me. That's fine. Go hang out with friends, watch some television, rest your brain. You're going to need it on Saturday. One thing you do need to do though is gather the supplies that you're going to need. Get your pencils, get your spare calculator, have your snack, get your admission ticket, make sure everything is ready to go. Remember a photo ID. You don't want to be turned away from the test after all this studying and all this hard work, especially if you're a senior and this is kind of your last shot. And no matter what you do, make sure you go to bed a little early. Make sure you have enough time in the morning to get ready in a good way and eat some breakfast. So if you are hanging out with friends, that's fine, but make sure you go to bed relatively early so that you are well rested for the test the next day. Let's talk about some of those predictions that I predicted I would kind of get to. So there are basically two problems that I think a lot of people feel during the test and certainly when they come out of it if they don't think they did well. Two things that they wish they had done. They either didn't memorize things or they didn't strategize on how to deal with the hardest questions. So this is what you can do Thursday, maybe a little bit of Friday, to make sure that you are targeting your weaknesses. Maybe for some of you, both of these things are weaknesses, but I will put this in the description. I will put links to all sorts of videos that I think really target these things well. Those videos are the main predictions. Those are telling you what's going to be on the test, what grammar rules to study. Grammar is high priority. You got to make sure you know those grammar rules because they are consistent on every single test. You will see the same 10 or 12 rules again and again and again. And if you don't know them, you will get them wrong. So make sure you know the grammar rules going in. You can also look at the transition words. I'm going to put a link to a really great transition video that I just made. I'm really proud of it. It's going to help you understand what these words mean and give you some strategies to deal with those questions. They're really easy to mess up, but if we know the strategy, they're really easy to get right. In math, you want to focus on things like quadratics. Do you know the vocabulary around quadratics? Do you know how to deal with the vertex? Do you know the vertex is sometimes called the maximum and the minimum? Can you build a vertex equation? All that stuff is really, really important. And just more generally, if there are math vocab ideas that you're still having trouble with, then make sure that you review those things. Over the next 2 days, I will try my best to make some more videos about things like box plots and standard deviation, those more obscure topics, or maybe a quick 2-minute review can do a good job for you. So make sure you subscribe so you get notifications about that. And then if all that's good, then you can just study some reading vocab. Yeah, we don't really know what words are going to come up on the test, but the more words you know, the less likely you are to kind of get something wrong or have to guess randomly. So if you've got all the other stuff down, reading vocabulary, I've got my link to my word sets in this description, so you can look at that and just try to absorb some more words. You never know, they might show up on the test. Now that's all the memorization stuff, and that's only going to get you so far, because then the hard questions show up and we need to have strategies that we can use to put all this great knowledge to good use on these questions that feel really, really weird. So the most important thing I think that surprises people is they don't have a good pacing strategy. So again, video in the description. I predict a lot of people are going to run out of time on the hard modules. You've got to have a plan to deal with that. I talk about that in those videos. If you're not okay with the fact that these are going to be really tough to finish, you're going to get really panicked, and that's going to cause all sorts of problems for you. Another way to kind of help with the pacing is to make sure you are good with the Desmos calculator. Make sure you watch my lesson on that so you know all the different tricks for what Desmos does. You also need to know how to plug points into equations and arithmetize. That's what those letters stand for. If you have no idea what those things are, then you didn't study enough for the math. You're not going to use the right strategies, and you're going to waste points and time that you should be getting. So we want to make sure we got that down. Dumb summaries for reading are really helpful. We'll talk about that in a second with that practice question that I wrote. And also really helpful for the hard reading passages is the trap answer categories. That's a great video to watch again if you've already done it, just to get a refresher on how those things look. Sometimes the only way that I can actually think through a hard reading passage is paying attention to the very common traps that we see in the answer choices. So these are all great things to look at. If you try to do it all, I think you'll get overwhelmed, but try to think about what you've gotten wrong in the past if you've been studying and focus on those things. But it really does come down to memorizing the right information so you're not drawing a blank when you get there to the test, but also having strategies to deal with the really hard stuff and being able to move through the test quickly and comfortably. So now let me put that reading passage up on the screen here. I'll do it for 10 seconds. That is way too little time to finish it, but you can pause the video, try the question on your own, and then I will explain it again. I wrote this to give you kind of a sense of a hard reading passage, and it hopefully feels like a real thing. It was not written by some robot, some chat GPT. It was written by this very good human brain. So I hope you like it. Here we go. All right, so this is one of those science passages that everyone hates. I don't think it's the worst one I've ever seen, but I tried to make it up there in terms of difficulty. The first thing you should always do is read the question. Make sure you know what they want. So which finding from the experiment, if true, would most directly support these people's hypothesis, right? So sometimes it says weaken the hypothesis. We need to make sure we know what we're doing. But even more important than that, this is reminding me that as I read this passage, I am not interested in every single detail. They're going to state the hypothesis at some point, probably very clearly. That's what I want to focus on. That's where my dumb summary is going to come from. And what we're doing here, my prediction for the actual test, is that these kinds of dumb summaries that we're going to make here are going to be really useful for those hard ones. So we're trying to make them more mathematical. I'll show you what I mean. The North American wood frog lays its eggs in shallow ephemeral ponds, often in clusters attached to submerged vegetation. Researchers Roberta Beauharnais and Jerome Urquhart recorded the size of L. sylvaticus egg clusters in various ponds over several years. They found that ponds with noticeable surface algae, which can lower the dissolved oxygen levels of fresh water, tended to have clusters with fewer eggs. Beauharnais and Urquhart hypothesized that L. sylvaticus could sense the oxygen level of a pond and deposit fewer eggs into ponds where low oxygen levels could jeopardize their offspring's survival. To test their hypothesis, these researchers devised an experiment in which some L. sylvaticus specimens were introduced to tanks with simulated ponds that varied only in the dissolved oxygen levels of the water. If the frog chose to lay eggs in the simulated pond, the size of the egg clusters was recorded. Okay, awesome. So my dumb summary here is going to be really kind of mathematical. So let's do this down here. Remember, a dumb summary is we don't want to put this into like other words. We want to keep the number of words that we use to summarize what's going on as low as possible. I also think for a lot of passages, especially these dense science ones, thinking more mathematically about our dumb summaries is really helpful. So the way I see this is kind of like ups and downs here. So they hypothesize that they can sense the oxygen and they will deposit fewer eggs into ponds where low oxygen levels could jeopardize the offspring. So low oxygen means low eggs, right? Look at that dumb summary. That is so nice and simple, right? And it's got a little bit of a connotation, right? The oxygen is bad, so it's going to hurt the egg. So we could think about it that way too. But I really love that it has this kind of mathiness to it. So this is also freeing us so that we don't have to feel like we need to write out some sort of sentence in order to summarize it, right? You're not talking to your English teacher. We are just trying to capture it in the simplest way possible. A lot of times this is what we want. And now we're going to look for something that hopefully matches this in some way. And we can also dumb summarize the choices in certain ways to kind of compare the relationships. So A, regardless of the oxygen level of the simulated ponds, the L. sylvaticus specimens in the experiment laid fewer eggs than did the wild L. sylvaticus specimens studied earlier. So this sounds like the experiment is less than the wild, right? So also very mathematical. And I don't think I would have bothered to do that on the test because I kind of know it's wrong already, but just to show you different ways of kind of mathematizing some of these reading things, it's basically making a comparison saying one is worse or better. And so they're saying the experimental one is worse than the wild one. Well, notice that doesn't even look close to what our dumb summary was about the passage. Plus, is the passage really comparing the wild ones to these experimental ones? No, the purpose of the experiment is to see why the wild ones are doing what they're doing. So this just doesn't make any sense. I guess in a way, this is kind of fitting into that normal category that I've talked about in other videos about comparisons. I'm nervous about a comparison that doesn't appear in the choice or in the passage. Also here, regardless of oxygen level. Notice that our dumb summary is based upon the oxygen level. So if they say regardless, that seems to say the oxygen level doesn't matter. Our summary is focused on that. So that seems weird to just dismiss it completely. Let's look at B. A is wrong. B, the simulated ponds with the highest oxygen levels were consistently found to have the greatest number of L. sylvaticus eggs per cluster. So that's interesting, right? That says the higher oxygen meant more eggs. Now, at first you might be like, yeah, that's the opposite of what we want, right? But in a way, it's not really the opposite. It seems actually to be the same because the arrows are going in the same direction. They flipped them. That feels like a common SAT move, right? To kind of throw us off the trail a bit. But this is the benefit of maybe these kind of dumb summaries with these arrows is we might be able to see that relationship isn't as bad as it might sound when we just read it. So I'm not going to eliminate this or pick it at this point. I still would prefer to it just to match my dumb summary exactly, but we'll keep this. This is at least in the right direction, the right relationship. So let's look at C. While the difference in size of the egg clusters was statistically insignificant, so the size is insignificant, the eggs laid in simulated ponds with lower oxygen levels were less likely to hatch than those laid in higher oxygen ponds. So a couple things we could do here. First, they're saying size doesn't matter. So if I wanted to do like something like that, like size is 0, like it doesn't matter, it's nothing. That doesn't seem to be what we're talking about, right? That's the number of eggs. The number of eggs doesn't matter. That seems weird. Plus, if we wanted to think about the arrows a little bit, the eggs laid in simulated ponds with lower oxygen, so lower oxygen equals less likely to hatch. Now, maybe the hatching has something to do with the size of the egg cluster, but it's not quite the same thing in a very dumb way, right? So I'm kind of seeing that even though the first part of this choice might be right, the thing about low oxygen, the second part is introducing an idea that I don't remember being in the passage. I could go back and talk and look for whether or not they talk about the eggs hatching, but I just don't see that here. So not a great sign. So I would actually get rid of C pretty confidently here. Now D, the size of an L. sylvaticus egg cluster in the simulated ponds showed a negative correlation with the pond's oxygen level. This sounds really good because it says negative and it seems like both of them are going down, so that seems good. But let's be really clear about what's happening here. If we said that the lower oxygen is kind of the direction we're going, right? And then they said there's a negative correlation. A negative correlation means that these things move in opposite directions. So that means that if oxygen goes down, there's actually more eggs, right? So this is maybe a case where like some science vocab can really help, because negative sounds good. Both those arrows that I drew are pointing down, but it doesn't mean that. It means that they don't work together, right? So a positive correlation is if one thing goes up, the other thing goes up. A negative correlation is if one thing goes up, the other thing goes down. This is also sometimes called an inverse correlation. So even though that word negative is really tempting, if we know what that means and we draw out this little math summary here with the arrows, we can see that it's not the same. But certainly B is better, right? Because at least B has the arrows going in the same direction. We want the negative oxygen to mean fewer eggs, not more eggs. And so just this part here would make me skeptical of this choice enough to be much more comfortable picking B, which, yeah, the SAT flipped it on us to see if we're paying attention, but thinking about it in this kind of mathematical way helps me see through that and see that the relationship is preserved. The oxygen goes down, the eggs go down. The oxygen goes up, the eggs go up, right? It's the same direction. So that's really, really important. And so if, I hate giving predictions, but my prediction for the actual November SAT, for every SAT from here on out, is that we're going to need to think of a lot of these science passages using dumb summaries that look like this, that use mathematical symbols, that use arrows, that preserve relationships, because otherwise to hold this stuff in our head is really hard. Knowing as well that the SAT is sometimes going to flip the direction of things so that it's even harder for us to kind of match the words in the passage to the words in the choice. So use your scratch paper. You get it for the reading section. Use it, write stuff like this down. That way when they flip things, you can see the relationship as well flipped in your answer choice. Hopefully this helped. I definitely think that this is the only way I would be able to get a question like this and even harder ones right on the SAT. I need these kinds of dumb mathematical summaries. Well, I hope that was helpful. If it was, please give me a like, give me a subscribe, especially if this is your first SAT and you are going to take more. Return to this channel. I promise you will find a lot of valuable resources to help you continue to improve your scores. Once again, I'm Mike Settele. Good luck on your SAT. And remember, when it comes to your scores, don't settle for less, Settele for more. Thanks for watching.